My own family called me a heartless monster for calling the cops on my sister's husband after he drained my entire life savings. They told me I was blowing things out of proportion, that it was a family matter, and that I was destroying my sister's life over a misunderstanding. But they didn't know I was about to uncover a decade-long web of lies that would tear our entire family apart. Stick with me because how this ends is something nobody saw coming. Before we dive into it, tell me in the comments where you're from. I love seeing the different places people tune in from. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. 6 years. That was how long I spent building my savings account. I was 28 years old and worked as an architectural designer. I wasn't rich. I didn't come from money. Every dollar in that account had a purpose. I skipped vacations. I drove the same old car long after my friends upgraded theirs. I said no to expensive dinners and impulse shopping because I had one dream. I wanted a home of my own. I wanted a bright townhouse with large windows, a small office, and a tiny garden where I could drink coffee on Saturday mornings. Every paycheck brought me closer to that dream. When my balance finally reached $85,000, I felt proud of myself. I remember opening my banking app and staring at the number for almost a minute. I had done it completely on my own. Around that time, my sister Talia and her husband Vance invited me to dinner. Vance had a way of making people trust him. He always wore expensive suits and talked about investments, business opportunities, and financial strategies. According to him, he worked as a logistics consultant and helped companies streamline operations. My parents adored him. My sister practically worshipped him. At dinner, he casually asked how my savings goals were going. I shouldn't have answered. But I was proud of what I had accomplished. I told him I had finally saved enough for a down payment on a house. His eyes widened. 85,000? Tess, that's incredible. I smiled. Then he started asking questions. What bank was I using? Was the money in a high-yield account? Had I considered diversifying my savings? He sounded genuinely interested. Before the evening ended, he offered to look over my financial statements. I might be able to help you grow it even faster, he said. No pressure. I just don't want your money sitting in the wrong place. It sounded harmless. He was family. At least I thought he was. The next morning, I emailed him copies of my account statements. 48 hours later, my entire life changed. I was at work when I opened my banking app. I almost dropped my phone. The balance showed 0. I refreshed the screen. 0. I checked again. Still 0. My heart started pounding. I called the bank immediately. After several minutes on hold, the representative confirmed there had been multiple wire transfers initiated from my account. The money was gone. $85,000. Every cent. I couldn't breathe. I left work early and drove straight to my sister's house. Vance answered the door. The moment he saw my face, he tensed up. I held up my phone. What happened to my money? He blinked. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. Oh, that. Don't panic. It's a liquidity glitch. I stared at him. What? A temporary issue. Money gets moved around during certain investment procedures. You transferred $85,000. It'll be back in a few days. I searched his face, waiting for him to admit this was some terrible mistake. Instead, he folded his arms. You need to relax. Relax. I had spent 6 years saving that money. I went home shaking. I waited 3 days. Then 5. Then 7. Nothing came back. Every time I called, Vance had another excuse. A banking delay. A processing issue. A paperwork problem. Finally, I drove to my parents' house because I believed they would be furious. I thought my father would demand answers. I thought my mother would tell me to call the police. Instead, fear was the only thing on their faces. My mother started crying. My father kept pacing the living room. Then he said words I never expected to hear. Tess, don't involve the authorities. Something cold settled in my chest. What? This can be handled privately. Privately? He stole my life savings. My mother grabbed my hand. Please don't do this. At that moment, Talia walked into the room. Her eyes moved between us. When she heard what happened, she didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask if the money could be recovered. He pointed at me. You've always been jealous of our marriage. I felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. Jealous. You're trying to ruin him. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My entire future had just vanished and somehow I had become the villain. I turned to my parents. Neither of them defended me. Neither of them demanded answers from Vance. They simply stood there, frozen. I suddenly realized something that made my stomach turn. They were more worried about protecting him than protecting me. I stood up. No one tried to stop me. I walked out of the house, got into my car and drove across town. 20 minutes later, I parked outside the local police precinct. I sat there for almost 5 minutes with my hands on the steering wheel. Then I got out. I walked inside completely alone. And I filed a formal police report against my brother-in-law for stealing 6 years of my life, one wire transfer at a time. The immediate aftermath of the police report was worse than losing the money. I woke up the next morning to 23 text messages from my mother. At first, I thought she had come to her senses. I was wrong. The first message read, "How could you do this to your sister?" The second said, "You're being vindictive." The third called me selfish. By the end of the messages, she was calling me cold-blooded and accusing me of tearing the family apart. Not once did she ask how I was surviving after losing $85,000. Not once did she ask whether I had enough money to pay my bills. To my family, the real tragedy wasn't the theft. It was the fact that I had reported it. A few minutes later, I tried calling Talia. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. I opened social media and discovered I had been blocked everywhere. Text messages wouldn't go through. My emails bounced back. I couldn't even see her profile picture anymore. Then I noticed something else. I no longer had access to the shared online photo album where she posted pictures of my niece and nephew. Just like that, I had been erased from their lives. That hurt more than I expected. I loved those children. I attended every birthday party and school play. I bought them Christmas presents and babysat whenever Talia needed help. Now I couldn't even see their pictures. 3 days later, my father knocked on my apartment door. I thought maybe he had come to apologize. Instead, he sat at my kitchen table and looked exhausted. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "I can give you $20,000 from my retirement account." I went quiet, certain I'd misheard him. "What?" "You take the money and drop the charges." For a moment I couldn't find any words to give him back. "Dad, he stole $85,000. "I know. 20,000 doesn't even cover a quarter of it." He rubbed his forehead. "It's all I can afford." I shook my head. "I'm not dropping the charges." His expression changed immediately. "You are obsessed with this." I blinked. "Obsessed? You're acting crazy, Tess. Families survive things like this all the time." Something inside me cracked. My father was sitting in my kitchen calling me crazy because I wanted my stolen savings back. He left 10 minutes later. I didn't hear from him again. The weeks that followed were painfully quiet. I went to work and came home. I ate dinner alone. I checked my nearly empty bank account every night. I stopped making plans because I couldn't afford them anymore. On Sundays, I would sometimes drive past my parents' neighborhood. Their cars were in the driveway. Talia's minivan was there too. I knew they were all inside eating dinner together, laughing, talking, living their lives. And I was sitting alone in my car only a few miles away, wondering if maybe everyone was right. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I should have stayed quiet. But then I would remember why I had walked into that precinct alone in the first place. And I knew exactly who had really broken this family. 3 weeks after filing the police report, I was eating a microwave dinner at my kitchen counter when my phone rang. I almost ignored it because I didn't recognize the number. Then I answered. "Miss Bennett?" "Yes. This is Detective Miller. I'm the investigator assigned to your fraud case. I'd like you to come to the precinct tomorrow morning." Panic flickered through me immediately. "Did you find my money?" There was a short pause. "We need to discuss a few things in person." His voice was calm, but something about it made me nervous. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I arrived at the precinct 15 minutes early. I expected a routine meeting. Maybe he had updates on bank records or information about the wire transfers. Instead, Detective Miller walked into the interview room carrying a thick file and wearing an expression that looked almost concerned. He was in his 50s with gray hair and tired eyes that suggested he had spent years dealing with people's worst decisions. He sat across from me and opened the file. For several minutes, he reviewed papers without speaking. The silence made me uneasy. Finally, he slid a page toward himself and tapped a series of routing numbers. "Your brother-in-law is sloppy," he said. I frowned. "But he's confident." That's the strange part. I didn't understand. He looked at the paperwork again. It's exactly how he handled the Miller-Jones case 6 years ago. Same routing tricks. Confusion crossed my face. The what case? He looked up. The Miller-Jones case. I stared at him. I don't know what that is. For the first time he seemed confused. You've never heard of it? No. He leaned back in his chair. I watched his expression change. It was the look of someone suddenly realizing an important piece of information was missing. He closed the file. Your brother-in-law told you he had no history of fraud investigations, didn't he? I nodded. As far as I know, he has no criminal record. Detective Miller exhaled slowly. Technically, he doesn't. Dread pooled low in my chest. What does that mean? He folded his hands on the table. It means your brother-in-law has been investigated for major fraud twice before. I couldn't speak. What? 2 separate investigations. Different victims. Different circumstances. Then why wasn't he arrested? Because both cases disappeared before indictment. I stared at him. Disappeared. The complaints were withdrawn. Settlements were reached. Witnesses stopped cooperating. The room suddenly felt too warm. Denial rose in me fast. No, that's impossible. My sister would know. The detective didn't answer. I looked at him again. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't shocked. He looked like a man who had seen this story before. Then he said the line that reshaped everything I thought I knew. This isn't his first time stealing from a partner's family, Tess. Static filled my ears. He held my gaze. It's just the first time a family member actually let us file the paperwork. For several seconds the words wouldn't fully land. I had walked into that precinct believing my life savings had been stolen by one dishonest man. I walked out realizing something far worse. I had trusted a predator. And somehow, everyone around him had let him keep hunting. I couldn't stop thinking about what Detective Miller had said. This wasn't the first time. Those words followed me everywhere. At work I stared at blueprints without seeing them. At home I lay awake replaying every conversation I had ever had with Vance. Then another thought hit me. My parents' reaction. The panic. The pleading. The desperate demands to keep the police out of it. That wasn't shock. It was fear. Fear only comes when people already know something. I requested a week off from work and drove to the county courthouse on Monday morning. The records building was old and quiet. The clerk pointed me toward the archive room and showed me how to request old filings. I started with Vance's full name. The first search produced almost nothing. Then I tried older records. An hour later I found the first file. The case was 8 years old. A woman named Nora had filed a complaint involving her elderly uncle. I sat down and started reading. My hands wouldn't stay still. According to the documents, Vance had been dating Nora for almost 2 years. During that relationship he gained access to her family's financial information and convinced her uncle to participate in what he described as a business opportunity. $50,000 disappeared. The complaint alleged fraud and unauthorized transfers. Then the case suddenly ended. I kept reading. An out-of-court settlement had been reached. A strict non-disclosure agreement followed. No criminal charges. No public trial. No consequences. I read his name again, refusing to look away. Then I requested more records. By late afternoon another file appeared. This one was 5 years old. The complainant was a woman named Cleo. The documents revealed she had been engaged to Vance. Just weeks before their wedding, her father's business accounts had been compromised. Money had been transferred through multiple accounts and temporarily disappeared. The wedding never happened. The engagement ended abruptly. Again there was a financial settlement. Again the criminal complaint was withdrawn. Again Vance walked away. I sat there for a long time with both files open in front of me. Cleo. And now me. 3 women. 3 trusting families. 3 financial disasters. I slowly started connecting the pieces. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't poor judgment. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern. Vance entered relationships with women who came from supportive families. He earned everyone's trust. He learned how much money was available and who controlled it. Then when the opportunity appeared, money vanished. And every single time the families did the same thing. They stayed quiet. They paid settlements. They avoided scandal. They protected their reputations. And because they wanted to avoid public embarrassment, Vance kept walking away free to find another victim. I looked down at the files one last time. The horrible truth became impossible to ignore. I wasn't dealing with a man who had made one terrible mistake. I was dealing with someone who had built a quiet career out of other families' silence. And for the first time in years, someone had refused to bury the evidence. That someone was me. I didn't call ahead. I didn't text. I drove straight to my parents' house on Thursday afternoon with copies of the court files sitting on the passenger seat beside me. My hands gripped the steering wheel the entire way. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I wasn't even angry anymore. I just wanted the truth. I walked inside without knocking. My parents still kept a spare key hidden under the flower pot by the front steps. They were both in the living room. My mother looked up from the couch. "Tess." My father stood slowly. I didn't answer. I walked to the coffee table and dropped the files onto it. The papers spread across the wood. Nora's name was on one set. Cleo's was on the other. Neither of my parents touched them. "Read them," I said. The room became completely silent. My father looked down at the documents. Then his face lost all color. My mother covered her mouth. That was all I needed to see. They knew. "Oh my God," my mother whispered. The air in the room felt suddenly thinner. "You knew," I said quietly. Neither of them answered. I looked at my father. "Tell me I'm wrong." He sat down heavily on the couch. My mother suddenly started crying. Not gentle tears. The kind that come when someone has been carrying a secret for too long. "We didn't want this to happen," she said. For a moment none of it felt real. "How long?" My father stared at the floor. Finally he spoke. 3 years ago." My mind went blank for a second. 3 years. They had known for 3 years. He rubbed his hands together. Vance got into trouble with a business associate. Someone accused him of stealing money. I said nothing. I looked into it myself. I found old allegations and settlements. My whole body went rigid. "You knew he had done this before." My father closed his eyes. "Yes." The room seemed to tilt. "What did you do?" His answer made me feel sick. "I paid $40,000. I went still. "What?" He said he needed help fixing the situation. I gave him the money. The words landed like a blow. "You gave a fraud suspect $40,000? I was trying to protect your sister." My mother sobbed harder. "We didn't want Talia finding out her husband was a liar." I looked from one parent to the other. Everything suddenly made sense. The panic. The accusations. The desperate attempts to stop me. They hadn't called me crazy because they believed Vance was innocent. They called me crazy because if I was right they would have to admit something terrible. They had known a wolf was living inside this family. And they had protected him. They had funded him. They had defended him. And they had allowed me to walk straight into his trap. My father looked up at me with red eyes. "If he goes to prison, Talia will lose everything. She has 2 children. She'll be bankrupt and alone." I felt tears burn my eyes. "And what about me?" Neither of them spoke. I took a shaky breath. No more secrets. No more protection. "Tess, please." I shook my head. "This ends with me." I picked up my bag and walked toward the door. Behind me, my mother was crying and my father was begging. But for the first time since my money disappeared, I knew exactly what I had to do. The cycle stopped here.
The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was getting ready for work. Detective Miller's voice sounded different this time. There was no caution in it. No uncertainty. He simply said, "We're moving in today." Something inside me lurched. Less than an hour later, he called again and confirmed it was done. Police cruisers had pulled into my sister's neighborhood just after sunrise. Vance had walked into his driveway carrying a travel bag when officers approached him. The investigators believed he was preparing to leave before the overseas transfer could be completed. In front of several neighbors, he was placed in handcuffs and informed that he was being charged with grand larceny, wire fraud, and identity theft. I pictured him standing there in his expensive clothes, finally unable to talk his way out of trouble. For 6 years, I had sacrificed vacations, upgrades, and easy comforts for that money. For years, he had moved from victim to victim without consequences. Now he was sitting in the back of a police vehicle. My phone started ringing before noon. It was Talia. The moment I answered, she was screaming. I had never heard her sound like that before. She accused me of destroying her children's lives and called me cruel and vindictive. She insisted Vance was innocent and claimed the police had made a terrible mistake. I tried to speak, but she wouldn't let me. She blamed me for the neighbors watching the arrest. She blamed me for her children's confusion and fear. Then she said something that hurt more than I expected. She swore I would never see her family again. Before I could answer, she hung up. An hour later, my father called. He sounded frantic. He said he was trying to gather money to get Vance released. He kept repeating that jail would destroy the family. I listened in silence, finally seeing clearly what my parents had been protecting all along. By evening, Detective Miller called with another update. Because the case involved federal wire fraud charges and evidence suggested Vance was preparing to move money overseas, prosecutors argued that he was a flight risk. Bail had been set so high that there was almost no chance of paying it. My father called again, begging me to help somehow. I refused. I told him that if he wanted to discuss the case, he could speak through my attorney. Then I ended the call. My apartment felt incredibly quiet afterward. I sat alone at my kitchen table and looked around the room. My family was gone. My sister hated me. My parents had chosen their side. The trial ahead would be long and painful. But for the first time since my savings disappeared, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was completely alone, and strangely, that made me stronger. The pretrial hearings began 2 months after Vance's arrest. Walking into the courthouse felt strange because I had spent weeks wondering whether I had done the right thing. Then I saw Vance sitting beside his attorney. He looked calm, almost bored, as if this entire situation was an inconvenience instead of the result of his own actions. When the hearing began, his lawyer tried to reshape the story immediately. He argued that my money had never been stolen. According to him, it was a family loan that had gone wrong. He suggested I had trusted Vance to manage the funds and later changed my mind after investments failed. Listening to him was surreal. There had never been a loan. There had never been an agreement. Yet he spoke with such confidence that I finally understood how Vance had escaped consequences before. They didn't need the truth. They only needed confusion. They wanted to create enough doubt to make everyone question what really happened. Then the prosecution made its move. Because I had tracked down the old victims, the prosecutor requested permission to call additional witnesses to establish a pattern of behavior. The judge allowed it. First came Nora's uncle. He described how Vance had earned his trust, presented himself as a financial expert, and persuaded him to move money that disappeared almost immediately. Then Cleo's father took the stand. He explained how his business accounts had been compromised just before his daughter's wedding and how his family had been pressured into settling quietly to avoid public embarrassment. The courtroom became completely silent. Their stories sounded painfully familiar. Different names, different years, the same methods, the same lies, the same promises that the money would return. For the first time, Vance looked uncomfortable. He shifted in his seat and stopped making eye contact with anyone. By the end of the week, local reporters had picked up the story. News articles began appearing online, describing allegations of a decade-long pattern of financial exploitation. Suddenly, the public shame my parents had tried so desperately to avoid was everywhere. Friends called them. Neighbors asked questions. People in their community began whispering. The secret they had protected for years had become impossible to hide. Then came the final blow. The prosecution outlined the evidence, the hidden accounts, and the potential penalties. Vance was facing the possibility of spending 15 years in federal prison. I watched his confidence disappear. The man who had once laughed in my face looked frightened. During a recess, his attorney requested discussions with prosecutors. Hours later, we learned that Vance wanted a plea deal. He was willing to admit guilt. But the prosecution refused to negotiate unless one condition was met first. Every dollar taken from me had to be returned. For the first time since my savings vanished, justice no longer felt impossible. It felt close enough to touch. The sentencing hearing was surprisingly short. By then, Vance had already agreed to a plea deal and admitted his role in the fraud. The judge reviewed the evidence, the hidden accounts, and the financial records that connected him to previous schemes. Then the sentence was announced. 7 years in federal prison. I felt my chest tighten as the words echoed through the courtroom. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't revenge. It was relief. For the first time in months, I knew I didn't have to worry about him hurting anyone else. The judge also ordered full restitution. The money seized from the shell accounts would be liquidated immediately and returned to me. Vance sat silently beside his attorney, staring at the table. The confidence and charm that once convinced people to trust him had completely disappeared. He looked like an ordinary man facing the consequences of his choices. When the hearing ended, he was escorted away in handcuffs without looking back. The weeks that followed exposed even more lies. Talia finally gained access to all of their financial records and discovered the truth about her marriage. The beautiful house she thought they owned was drowning in debt. There were unpaid loans, maxed-out credit lines, and hidden obligations she had never known existed. Even the expensive lifestyle she had defended for years had been built on borrowed money and deception. She had no way to keep the house. Eventually, it was sold to cover creditors and outstanding debts. With nowhere else to go, she moved back into my parents' basement with her children. Then one afternoon, while sorting through old papers in the living room, she found the copies of Nora's and Cleo's files that I had left behind months earlier. She read every page. Then she confronted our parents. At first, they tried to explain themselves, but the truth was impossible to avoid. They had known about Vance's history. They had discovered his past years earlier and chosen to hide it. That realization destroyed whatever trust remained. Talia understood that she had been lied to not only by her husband, but also by our parents. They had known there was danger and had protected appearances instead of protecting their daughters. They had worried about embarrassment and gossip while allowing a dishonest man to remain inside the family. In trying to save their image, they had sacrificed both of us. My sister's marriage had collapsed, her home was gone, and my savings had nearly disappeared forever. According to relatives who still occasionally called me, my parents' house became painfully quiet. Talia spoke to them only when necessary and kept mostly to herself with the children. The cheerful family dinners they once protected no longer existed. Their obsession with looking perfect had finally accomplished the opposite. The family they fought so hard to preserve had completely shattered, and no amount of silence could put the pieces back together. 3 weeks after the sentencing, I opened my banking app and froze. My account balance had changed overnight. The $85,000 was back. Along with it came court-ordered interest and reimbursement for legal expenses. I stared at the numbers for a long time. 6 years of hard work had almost disappeared because I trusted the wrong person. Now, every dollar had been restored legally and transparently. I didn't celebrate with a party or post anything online. Instead, I met with a realtor and finally did something I had dreamed about for years. 2 months later, I signed papers for a beautiful townhouse downtown. It had large windows, sunlight pouring into every room, and a small space near the kitchen where I could sit with my morning coffee. I changed my phone number, updated my address, and cut all contact with my parents. I needed peace more than I needed explanations. One evening, after moving into my new home, I found an envelope in my mailbox. The handwriting on the front immediately looked familiar. It was from Talia. I carried it inside and sat by the window before opening it. The letter was short. There were no excuses and no attempts to defend herself. She admitted that I had been right from the beginning. She apologized for calling me jealous, selfish, and cruel. She wrote that she finally understood how deeply she had failed me and how much damage had been done by protecting lies. At the end, she asked one simple question. Maybe someday, when I was ready, would I meet her for coffee? Just the two of us. I folded the letter and placed it on the kitchen counter. I wasn't ready to forgive her. Some wounds take longer to heal than others. But as I looked around my new home, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. I was no longer the crazy outcast my family had accused me of being. I was the woman who trusted herself when nobody else did. I had survived betrayal, stood alone, and refused to stay silent. I had broken a cycle that had trapped other families for years. And standing in the home I had earned with my own hard work, I finally understood something important. I hadn't lost everything. I had won. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing completely alone. If this story moved you, share where you're watching from, and tell me if you've ever had to choose truth over family. Like, subscribe, and join me for more powerful stories.
See you next time.